In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at the post-production aspects of removing green or blue screen, what we call chroma keying. But let's just take a moment to go through some of the practical elements of when you're on set and some tips and tricks surrounding the lighting of a subject and a green screen wall. So on the left-hand picture here, we can see lights that are pointed directly at the subject, and those are casting shadows directly behind the subject. We want to try and avoid this as much as possible. We don't really want any shadows in the background of our green screen or blue screen footage. And so when we look at the right-hand picture, we can see that the lights have been moved to the sides and they're aiming diagonally at the subject, and they're causing those shadows to go to the left and to the right of the subject, avoiding the background area. Something else to think about is how hard those shadows are. So we would put things in front of the lights like diffusion paper that would help soften the shadows, so even those that do creep into the background are minimal and soft. Take note that in these diagrams, the lights being shown are lighting the subject and the green screen background. In this lighting diagram, we can see that there are 3 lights. One of them is lighting the subject and the surrounding area, and the 2 at the back are lighting the green screen. They are lighting the foreground, the subject, and the background, the green screen, separately, giving you separate control of how much light falls onto the green screen and the subject as well. Having the lights separated like this mean that we have even less of a chance of putting shadow onto the green screen area, and we can have a nice, consistent and well lit green screen. Here is a similar lighting diagram that shows the foreground and the background being lit separately. The key thing between this and the last diagram is that the subject is separated from the background, not just by the lights, but physically in space. Moving your subject off of that back wall and away from the green screen as much as possible will give better results when it comes to doing this post-production work. What we're seeing in this diagram when it comes to the lights that are lighting the green screen is they're actually facing away from the background and hitting these bounce boards, maybe these polys, that are bouncing the light back and even softer onto the green screen. Let's start by opening up After Effects, and we are presented with 2 options, New Composition or Composition from Footage. So if we were bringing in a piece of footage to work on straight away, we would compose from new footage, but we are just going to choose New Composition and we'll start a new project. We're presented with the Composition Settings window and quite a lot of information here. We can name our composition, and we can see information such as resolution and frame rate, and we can see these set in some presets as well. And at the moment we are set at a preset of 1080, which is the resolution, and we've got a frame rate of 29.97, which roughly translates to 30 frames per second. 30 frames per second is an American standard, some other territories as well, but it's what we call an NTSC standard, the National Television Standards Committee. Whereas in the UK and Europe, we use 25 frames a second, also referred to as PAL, P-A-L, which stands for phase alternate line. So we're going to change our preset to match that 25 frame standard. When we choose that one, we'll also see our resolution change. So upon opening the program, we saw that the resolution was 1440 pixels by 1080. That's 1080 height, 1440 width. And when we change the preset, it goes to 1920 by 1080, which is a standard HD television resolution, and it is a standard television aspect ratio of 16:9. Inside of the settings, we're also able to make changes to the aspect ratio of the composition. By default, this is set to square pixels, and nearly all of the time this is how we want to leave it. But we are also able to change things into anamorphic aspect ratios. This all depends on the way that the footage that we're using was captured. If things were filmed on anamorphic glass, giving us aspect ratios of 2:1, or 2:35:1, 2.4:1, then we'd be able to correct our footage accordingly. Here we can change the duration of our composition. Here things are being measured in frames, but you're also able to measure in real time or using timecode. And we can also change the default background color of our composition. This doesn't have a huge bearing on what we're doing, but setting it to black as the default usually works best. There's also the Advanced and 3D Renderer tabs inside of the Compositions window, but for now we'll stick with the basics. We're able to come back into the composition settings at any time and make changes to these if for whatever reason we need to. Let's now take a quick look at our user interface for this program. Here in the timeline window, we're able to look at how our composition is coming together. And unlike traditional video editing, we're going to be working in layers of video and images, rather than putting images one after another in a consecutive sequence. We will be working horizontally like that, but we'll also be working vertically, with layers starting at the top and moving down, with our top layer being the most visible. This is often why After Effects is compared more to Photoshop than it is to Premiere Pro or other non-linear editors. Over here in our project window, this is where our footage is going to be held, very much like a bin in an editing program or a folder of footage. We'll be able to select our layer footage here. We'll also be able to look at any comps that we've made, and we'll be able to bring any of this media into our project. A quick word on workspaces. Over here on the top right, we can change our layout of the program to suit the needs of what we're doing at the time. Standard layout or effects layout will work well for what we're doing today. Here on the top left, we have our main tools bar, and largely we'll be using tools such as the main selection tool, the hand tool, and the pen tool. The text layer and rotoscoping tool are also staples of the program. So let's get into it and import some footage into our project to go into our composition. We could choose File from the top menu and then Import, but here we will right click in the project window, choose Import from there, and then navigate to where our media is being held. We'll dig through our folders and find the media that we need. And in this instance, we will stop digging into the folders and we'll just highlight two of the folders that we want to use and we'll import those. We can now drop down those folders inside of our project window to find our media. And we can click through and we can see a little preview window at the top of our project window. At this point, it's worth pointing out that when we do view our footage in full screen and that second tab opens up, that we must not confuse what we're viewing here with our composition. Our composition, where we're going to be doing all of our work, is different from this tab here, and we actually can't do any of our effects work in this tab. It's all done in the composition tab. So if you're viewing a piece of footage and you're not being able to make any effects to it, you're possibly stuck in this preview tab and you have to move out of that. So be warned. Let's bring this shot down into our timeline and thus creating our first composition. So we drag it from the project window and let go, drop it into the timeline. and you'll see what we've got here is our first layer. Depending on the project, this could be one of many, many layers, even into the hundreds. With the layer selected, we're then able to change its properties. So we can see that there is a set of nodes around the outer edge of this frame, and we can grab those and change the scaling and the position of the image. But you'll notice that I'm also changing the aspect ratio. I'm squashing and squeezing the image, which 9 times out of 10 is not going to be ideal. So how do I deal with that? Well, we'll just hit Command and Z to undo, and then we'll do that again. But this time, as I hold down the mouse button to move the node, I will hold down Shift on the keyboard, and now you'll see that that maintains the aspect ratio. If I let go of Shift while I'm changing the scale, then I will lose the aspect ratio control again, but you'll see that if I go past a certain point, I'm actually able to flip the image. So let's get to the matter at hand. Chroma keying our image to get rid of the green screen background and keep our foreground image. So there's always about 3 different ways to do everything in After Effects or other editing programs, and finding our keying effect is no different. So we could go to our presets menu, or we could go to our effects menu at the top and go and search for our keying effect. And in this instance, we will go to that effects menu at the top of our screen, and we will choose keying and then keylight 1.2. Just a note to say that the layer that we are affecting must be selected at this point for the effect to move onto that layer. When we select the effect, the keylight effect plugin moves into our effects tab next to our project tab, and we've got now lots of features inside of that effect that we're able to manipulate. And for our purposes right now, we're going to be looking at 5 major effect parameters inside of keylight 1.2. The ones that we're interested in are this eyedropper, where we'll select the color that we're looking to remove, the screen gain and screen balance, and if we drop this down, the clip black and clip white values. Lots of other features inside of this, but those 5 main features are what we'll be using to pull a really good key. So we're going to select that eyedropper, we're going to bring it over onto our footage, and we're going to select from the green background. Now, when making a selection, it's good practice to select the pixels near the foreground subject, the person that you're trying to keep in the shot, rather than in other sections of the green screen background. This can be because of the way that things have been lit on the green screen. The green pixels that we're interested in removing are the ones closest to your subject, the ones that outline your subject. We make the selection, and in almost a one-click process, we have separated our foreground subject from the background, and we've made the green screen section of the image transparent. The black that we're looking at here is actually transparency, and we can toggle the transparency switch here, and we can show that that black was actually see-through, transparent, and we get this transparency grid here instead. This is actually a really good way to work so that we're not confusing ourselves as to what is a solid black color and what is transparency. So we can move through our clip here, through our clip layer, and we can do that by hitting spacebar or hitting 0 on our number pad on our keyboard. And if we hit 0, it actually does a better job of rendering the image for playback. So at first glance, the keying almost looks like it's done. Just selecting the green using the eyedropper has removed the background, and as we say, at first glance appears to have done all of the work that we need, but it's not quite that simple. So let's take a closer look. Let's zoom in on one of the tools inside our composition window, and it's this RGB control. And we're going to select this. We're going to change it from RGB, red, green, blue, red, green and blue making up white and all other colours, and we're going to change it to alpha, and we're going to look at the alpha channel. So we click alpha, and the view of our work changes. And we're presented with this black and white view. This isn't an effect, this is just a manner of viewing the layer. And we can see that that black background, that's our transparency, and the white silhouette, that's our foreground that we're keeping. And our aim is to have a rich black background and a completely white silhouette. And we can see that there is still some detail in our subject here. We can see the visor she's wearing, and we can see some of the contours of her clothing. We want to achieve a completely white silhouette for our subject. That's going to give us the best key. And the way that we're going to do that is to use those other sliders inside of Keylight. So first we'll try using the screen gain. We can see that that's not doing a good job for us. So for demonstrational purposes we'll go a bit too far, and you can see that that black background is going grey, and that's going to destroy our key. If we just jump back into the RGB mode, we can see that although slightly transparent, the green is starting to come back. So this is not what we want. Back into alpha view. Put that screen gain where it was, and we'll try the balance. So the balance is having a negative effect on our white silhouette. We're bringing in too much detail with the foreground subject. Again, we don't want this. So let's undo that. We'll try and go the other way. Still no good. So we'll just Command Z and undo that. Put it back where it was. And we'll take a look at clip black and clip white down here. So again, destructive on the clip black. So let's try clip white. Take that down from 100. And you'll start to see that our silhouette is going solid white. Completely opaque, and that is what we want. You can see that if we go far too far the other way, we actually start to muddy up our silhouette. Dependent on the footage, we might find that we have to use all 4 of these black, white, gain and balance sliders to perfectly balance the image and get the best alpha channel and the best result. A big thing to look out for when doing this is to make sure that we're not being destructive with hair, and that we are getting the best levels of transparency and detail that we possibly can when it comes to hair on a subject. Let's bring in a background for our composition. With the keying done and we're happy with everything, we're going to drag from our backgrounds folder a suitable background into our composition, and just pay attention to where the layer is dropped. See that blue line that's changing? That's determining the order of the layers. So if we let go now, the new item has been dropped as the top layer. It's sitting on top of our green screen footage, and that's not where we want it. And it was that blue line that dictated that, so we don't want that layer to be there. We want it to be underneath. So we're going to grab it and pull it down underneath, and now you can see that the layers have changed positions. Our green screen footage is on top, and our background image is on layer 2, the next one down and behind. The scale of the background plate is not right. We need to make that bigger. So once again, we can grab that node in the corner, hold down Shift to preserve the aspect ratio, and then drag it out to the size of the frame. We'll hit 0 on our numpad to render and play, and now we can see that moving background and our foreground subject are now comped together. But our background layer isn't as long as our foreground layer, so we're going to have to do something about that. We can't make it any longer, but what we can do is duplicate it. So I could take another instance of it and drag it down onto my timeline, or I can select the layer that I want to duplicate and press Command and D on a Macintosh keyboard or Control and D on a PC. That makes a copy, and then I can move it downstream and have it carry on as our background. So we've got a nice composition going on with our foreground and background elements together. But I just want us to go back and pay a little bit of attention to our foreground image. So we'll just play this on loop for a moment. What we've done is we've turned off the background image. We did that by hitting those eye symbols on the left hand side of the layers, and that's just turned those off. They're still there, we just can't see them right now. And what we're looking for in the foreground image that we took the green screen away from is we are looking at now the dark areas of this image, and we're looking out for something called noise. Digital noise that is moving in the dark areas of our image and making an unattractive mess on our image. So we're going to try and look for that, identify it, and then tackle it. This noise will only present itself during playback, and we'll only see it when dark parts of the image are not being lit. So as our subject turns the head towards the light, that noise will disappear. Great, because it's being lit. But when the head moves into shadow, the noise will present itself. The way that we're going to tackle this is using something called an alpha track matte. Firstly, we're going to select our green screen layer and duplicate it. Again, Command D on the keyboard. And then on our new duplicated layer, our new layer 2, which is a copy of our green screen footage, we are going to go to the mode sections, these toggles here, and where it says track matte, we are going to change the track matte option of our new layer 2. So at the moment it says none, and we're going to open this drop down menu, and we're going to choose alpha matte, and it's pointing at the first layer, our original green screen layer. So we're going to select that one, and at first glance there hasn't been much of an effect, but let's carry on. We can see over here that our original top layer is now disabled. That eye symbol has been turned off. We can see these alpha black and white symbols on our two channels, our two layers. And we can see that the track matte toggle says alpha, letting us know what we're doing. And then we're going to go into layer 2 and we're going to disable all of the green screen effects that we did earlier. This is on our duplicate layer. We're leaving the top layer alone. All of the green screen work and effects on layer 1 are left alone, and everything on layer 2 will now be disabled. We could highlight it and hit delete, turn it off, or we could hit this little FX button here and just turn it off like a light switch. So at the moment it's on. Now we'll just turn this on and off. We should be able to see a difference in the footage. The big difference being that that noise should disappear, because what we're viewing now is the footage with no green screen effect upon it, but simply the raw footage. So what is happening here? Well, what we're doing is we're using the alpha information. If we just look at that again now, we're using that white silhouette as a cookie cutter for every frame. We're cutting through the image, cutting the green away. Rather than make it transparent, we're cutting around the subject, and we are using the alpha information, that white information, as the cookie cutter. And every frame, every 25 frames per second, we are cutting through and removing the background and leaving the foreground. But we're not removing all of the green from the image anymore. We're using the original footage. We're just cutting the green away, or we're cutting around the subject. So let's take a look at that footage a bit closer now that we're viewing the raw footage again using the alpha track method. So what becomes apparent is that we are no longer pulling the green from the image, and what we're left with is something called spill, and that's the green hue that we can see on the subject's hair and on the VR mask. Let's get rid of that now. We're going to go into our effects menu, down into keying, and we're going to choose advanced spill suppressor. And what this is going to do is further remove the green spill that is on our subject, so in the hair and in the skin tones. If we disable and re-enable this effect, you can see those green aspects of the image appearing and disappearing, and of course we will leave it on. There are two modes to advanced spill suppressor, standard and ultra. Both give excellent results. Ultra, you can push the individual values and get an even better result, but standard does a really good job, and ultra does a bit more on the processing side, and so is a bit more of a drain on the project and the computer's processing power. At the moment our image is looking very flat, and that's because our foreground and background elements are both in sharp focus. So let's do something about that. Let's select our background layer, go to Effects, Blur and Sharpen, Gaussian Blur, and we're going to increase the blurriness factor. Just increase that from 0 and up, and that will put an all-over blur on the background. What we're doing here is we're imitating how a camera and lens work. subject in the foreground should be in sharp focus. That's what we are focusing on. And then our background element would have a soft fall off in focus. This is something called depth of field, and shallow depth of field in particular, and we're trying to imitate that here. We can then take this another step further and look at the colour in our scene. So we've got this blue background and then our neutrally lit foreground element. So I'm going to go to the effects and the colour correction panel, and I'm going to go to curves, and I'm going to select that effect, and that's going to go onto our foreground layer, the VR person. I'm going to change the curves channel to affect the blues, and I'm going to bring up the highlights and the shadows on the blues. We can see the effect taking place, and if we turn it on and off, we can see the difference between the natural and the colour corrected. And now the subject is more fitting with the background and is more believable in the scene. We looked at this lighting diagram earlier, and it shows the lights that are lighting the background element, the green screen, have these bounce boards, and potentially they are in the frame, causing an issue when we do our key. But there is a way around this, because sometimes having a lamp in the frame is unavoidable, and we have to do a little bit of work to remove it. So here we have another green screen element, and we're going to do a very quick key on this. We'll be using key light 1.2 again. And we will get rid of the background, and then we're going to take a look in our alpha channel. And although we've got a good key on the subject, and particularly on her hair, I draw your attention to the top left-hand corner of the image and that kind of white noise. If we start playing with the sliders to correct the background, we'll end up damaging the good work that we've done on the key of our foreground subject. So there's the problem area in question, and we're going to use the pen tool here, G on the keyboard, to come onto our foreground layer, and we're going to draw around the subject in a very rough mask. We don't have to stay inside of the frame. We can go outside of the canvas, and we'll just draw these node points around, and everything inside the mask is kept, and everything outside the mask is thrown away, trashed, and becomes transparent. So we can go back to our RGB view, and now our subject has been isolated in the mask, and that problem area in the top left has been removed. If I just drop down this arrow in our layer, we can see lots of aspects that we can change, including the colour of the mask, just to make it more obvious. We might have multiple masks on a layer, and so having different colours will help us differentiate. Just going to play the layer forwards, and I can see that the edges of our subject are actually going beyond the boundaries of the mask, and that's a problem. Let's just watch that again. There we can see that the hair is going outside of the mask. Let's correct that. So after identifying the problem and staying inside of the pen tool, I can grab the nodes of the mask and drag them out to keep our subject inside. So the hair and the shoulder. Now your subject might move a lot more than this. This is quite minimal. but hands can end up going outside of masks, so we have to be careful and keep everything inside. There is an ability to animate the mask using mask path. And this just shows you what feathering can do, especially if we go extreme with it. A few pixels of feather is all you need, really. The mask expansion values can also have positive and negative effects on your image as well. Before we finish up, a quick word on Adobe's dynamic link. In this instance, how we can manipulate footage between Premiere Pro and After Effects. So here we are in Premiere. We've got some green screen footage. We could do all of our chroma keying and green screen removal inside of Premiere, but we're going to do it a slightly different way. We're going to put our footage on the timeline, and we are going to bring in a background image as well. And we're going to make a deliberate mistake. We're going to put our background footage on top of our green screen footage. Once again, we could fix this in Premiere by simply switching the video tracks on V1 and V2. What we're going to do is we're going to send both of these elements to After Effects to do our work. So we're going to highlight both elements on each track, right click, and then choose Replace with After Effects Composition. Selecting this opens After Effects, starts a new project, which we can name. And now these two assets are sitting in After Effects the same way that they were sitting inside Premiere. So let's swap the layer order. So our background element is now sitting behind the green screen. You can adjust the size of the background element even though it's underneath the first layer. And then we can do a quick green screen background removal. I'm just turning off the background layer now because I want to view the alpha information and I don't want to see the alpha information of the second layer. So very quickly, I'm just going to adjust the black and white clip balances. Take us once again into the RGB mode. Turn our background layer back on. We're going to use hue and saturation to change the color to perform a basic color correction. I'll reduce the overall saturation. Then I'll bring in the curves effect again, and I'll bring down the overall luminance and darkness of the image and then go into the blue channel and raise that in an effort to match our background. This is all very quick. We'd spend a bit more time on this. Then I'm going to select the background layer and again go into the hue and saturation on the color correction tab. And I'm going to bring the master saturation down on there as well because it is quite punchy on the saturation, and we'll bring the lightness meter down as well. Then we'll add a Gaussian blur to try and bring in an idea of depth of field. You can see that when that blur was brought in on that background plate, it's actually shrunk the image ever so slightly by a few pixels just around the edge. So we can see some of the transparency behind there, just around the edge of the background image. So let's try and sort that out. And we can remedy that by changing the scale of that background plate. So I'm going to grab one of the nodes from the background layer and just slightly increase the scale, remembering to hold down Shift so that I don't distort the aspect ratio. So with all of that done, let's get to the point. Let's jump back into Premiere and we can see that all the work we just did in After Effects has taken effect inside of Premiere. What we're doing here is relatively basic, but After Effects has got lots of other plugins that do lots more in terms of complex effects, huge amounts of layers that we can bring in into our compositions that Premiere just can't handle in the same way. So we're able to do all of that work in a program that can handle the layers and the effects better and then bring it into our edit. One downside to this is that we have to keep rendering our dynamically linked assets inside of Premiere. So you can see that red line above the timeline window, above the clip. So I'm going to highlight the clip, go to Sequence, go to Render Selection, and it doesn't take too much time, but depending on how much work you've done and how many linked assets there are, render times can become a bit of a problem. You can see it's now gone green and it plays back very nicely. A way to avoid this constantly needing to render is to right-click on the linked asset, choose Render and Replace, and Premiere will make a new piece of media based on that dynamic link, but the link won't be there anymore. This will be a new piece of footage that is, in essence, finished and won't need to be edited again. If we jump back into After Effects and we go in and we make a change to the composition, and once again jump into Premiere, we can see that that link that's still in place means that any changes made in After Effects are made inside of our edit as well. A very powerful tool that allows us to work seamlessly between multiple programs. I hope this has been helpful. Happy editing and happy compositing.